Dear colleagues, we would like to present you our recent piece of research, which is devoted to referential phenomena in speakers' kinetic channels, that is, in the multi-channel communication. Here is a brief outline of our talk. So first we'll discuss referential choice as a phenomenon, then we'll turn to our methodology, and then we'll discuss our major results, that is how different types of movements and referential expressions are reflected in multi-channel communication, and then we will turn to functional types of gestures and how they are presented in manual and cephalic channels, and finally we will draw to the conclusion. What is referential choice as a phenomenon? It is the process of selecting a linguistic expression for a specific referent. That is, the same entity can be referred to in many ways. For example, it can be referred to by a full noun phrase, a full NP, мальчик уезжает, in Russian, the boy leaves. It can be referred to by a personal pronoun, by a demonstrative pronoun, a definite pronoun, and a zero expression in languages where this type of reference is allowed. And all these expressions can be combined under two major types, that is type of full and a reduced reference. So full noun phrases, full NPs are combined under the type of full reference, and other types such as personal pronouns, demonstratives, definite pronouns, and zero expressions are combined under reduced reference. And it was discussed earlier that reduced expressions such as zeros and personal pronouns are usually chosen for highly accessible and identifiable entities, while full noun phrases are prototypically chosen for new and less accessible information. And it is well known that both type of expressions correlate with various grammatical, semantics, and discourse factors, but their exact list still remains open. And in this regard, nonverbal communication holds a promise of potential related phenomena, which could predict referential choice. And by now, nonverbal factors of referential choice are less studied and mostly in the context of manual gestures. And in this work, we will discuss them in a wider framework of head movements, as well as within hand gestures, that is a manual channel.
Well, this current work we have conducted on the material of the RUPEX multi-channel corpus. The corpus consists of 3 videos, and this is number 22 recording. It lasts approximately for 54 minutes. Russian PHATs and stories corpus is a multimodal corpus, and it is based on the pair film of Chave 1980. This is one of the largest multimodal sources in terms of annotated channels, and as it has been noted already, the channels consist of kinetic, manual, verbal, referential, and some other channels. So here we would focus on manual and cephalic channels as well as referential annotation. So this referential annotation as such consists of pilot subcorpus of 3 sessions, which is for 141 minutes long. Here on the slide you can see the general design of the experiment and the positioning of the speakers. Here we can see the commentator, the narrator, the reteller, and the listener who joins the session later, and it is not in this particular work. So the corpus was designed according to specific technical solutions, and the equipment you can see on the slide here, with which we had the audio recording, the video recording, and there were the eye movement trackers, which detected the oculomotor movement of the speakers.
Now we'll turn to different types of annotated referential expressions, which we took for our research. So in general, we annotate deictic and anaphoric reference, but for the current study, we took only anaphoric expressions, that is full and reduced reference. So as it was said before, full referential expressions are noun phrases with a noun or a numeral head, for example, мальчик уезжает, the boy leaves, or жует только первый, only the first one is chewing, and under reduced reference we mean personal pronouns, demonstratives, definite pronouns, indefinite pronouns, and zeros. And for annotation, we used frame-by-frame software Elan, well-known software is an annotation tool, and all types of expressions were coded for their type, for animacy, for gender, number, and here is a screenshot of our referential annotation, how it looks in Elan.
Well, a few words about the kinetic channels. So there were manual and cephalic channels annotated according to the unified method of annotation acquired in our corpus. So the Elan software allowed us to do this, for us to align the annotation of manual and cephalic annotations, as well as the direction of the gesture and the phases of the gestures are concerned. So as far as the cephalic annotation is concerned, we have a vast majority of different things annotated there. So first of all, we decided that all the movements have to be tagged according to the direction. So here you can see some examples of the direction which we tagged. For example, down movement, up movement, right movement, left movement, forward, backward, and so on and so forth. And there is also an action type which we mark, and this is tilt, turn, slide, rotation, etc. According to this tagging, we have decided that probably there are different types of movements, and we name them according to the movement of the head itself. So that's why there are movements A, movements B, and displacements which we do not consider in this research. So the movement A type means that the head moves by the help of the neck muscles, independently of other kinetic channels. Whereas movement B type movements are those which are produced under the influence of other channels, for example, the echo movements or the adapters from the other channels of kinetic nature. According to the type of the movement, we have also decided to subcategorize them into functional types. Some of them are concomitant with those which we have in the manual channel, for example, depictive, pragmatic, pointing, and also we have the regulatory gestures as well as in the manual channel, but they are a little bit different here in the head channel. So with regulatory gestures, we mean that the participants interact with each other, and here you probably remember the positioning of the participants in our design experiment, and this setting allows the speakers to communicate with each other in a specific way and gesticulate to each other and point to those things which they have considered important and pay attention to some other things which they produce. So all those types of functioning or all those types of gestures in kinetic channels are analyzed separately. So the next slide, please. Here you can see the examples of cephalic movements A and movements B. Movement A and movement B, when the head does not act solely, but under the influence of some other kinetic channels.
Talking about manual annotation, first we distinguished periods of movements and periods of stillness. movements were divided into gestures, adapters, and position or posture changes. For gestures, we annotated their discourse function, their structure, and handedness. For this study, we chose only hand movements, which were marked as gestures. And each movement was additionally coded for direction, similar to the head direction. For all movements, we also marked the referential type they accompany. And with hand movements, we distinguished reduced reference and zero reference, as they influence the type of hand direction movements and hand functional type gesture they accompany. Here are a few examples. An example of a depictive gesture.
А потом он берет всю корзину,
which is rather complex by nature, and a pointing gesture.
если
You can see the speaker points to her left with her index finger.
In this slide, you can see the cephalic channel movement type A and reference. We annotated 942 entries of movement type A. Mostly of them were downward and upward movements. And out of the 3 participants, only C participant had an equal distribution on the 2 types of movements, while R had a clear predominance of downward movements. You can see on this significant correlation between downward movements and concomitant referential expression and other types. We can illustrate by this. Please this video to show how downward on the full reference works.
такой с карманом.
Consequently, the movement type A pattern with the amplitude taken into account allows one to predict the concomitant referential expression. Here, the graphs shows us all the type of amplitude and full and reduced references. Movement type B, we have 776 units found aligned with referential expressions. And as you see on this graph, no correlation with the type concomitant referential expression. That's why we understand that it's one more evidence for movements B to be displayed in a separate category.
For hand movements, we found that downward movements were the most often overall, but for zero reference, they were also the most expected, while downward movements were most likely to be accompanied by full and noun phrases, while zero forms were more often accompanied by a movement to the center. And here are the examples.
Он вот может не заметить что-то.
This is an example of an aside movement accompanying reduced reference with a pronoun. And the second example.
Помогает ему подняться.
Zero reference with a downward movement. Here is the graph for these categories.
For functional types of gesture, we use on cephalic channel the distinguished as in the manual channel. Depictive, pointing, pragmatic, and regulatory gestures. Let's see the first example, a depictive gesture.
У него такая еще шевелюра объемная, вот ему, наверное, 9.
And the second.
Помогает.
As you see on this picture, the pragmatic gesture is the most important for full and reduced reference. And the other is not so big, not have so big entries. Let's see the example of reference in cephalic gesture.
Лицом на большой камень.
This is full reference with a noun phrase.
Talking about manual functional type of gestures, we can see that for depictive gestures, they were most often combined with zero reference. And while pointing gestures were less often chosen for zero reference, but explicit reduced reference were more expected with them. We combined rhythmic and pragmatic gestures into one category, as rhythmic gestures were not met often enough to study them as a distinguished category. For the example, you can see the next slide. Here is the graph showing the combination of referential expressions and functional types of gestures. And here are video examples.
Помогает ему подняться.
The first one presents downward movements with of a depicted gesture with a zero reference, and the second one,
Что он вот может не заметить что-то.
pointing gesture with a reduced reference.
So, in conclusion, we can say that manual and cephalic gestures are combined in different ways with referential expressions. That is, zero expressions, according to our data, they are more likely to be accompanied by depictive hand gestures, as for the manual channel. And to explain why, we can assume that depictive gestures more often align with actions and thus correlate with predicates to which zero expressions are attributed in our corpus. And it was previously investigated by Yulia and Nikolaeva that depictive gestures often illustrated the foreground of the discourse and are often aligned with the most dynamic events of the story's main line. And that's why it is expected that such a description will relate to the actions of the protagonist, that is of a highly activated and therefore not often explicitly expressed reference, which as for Russian language is often referred to by a zero expression. And it can be argued that the detected correlation between depictive gestures and reduced referential expressions is a superficial phenomenon driven by internal factors such as the reference status as protagonist, as well as by topic continuity, which affect both the functional type of gesture and the type of concomitant referential expression. And zero reference are accompanied by movements of the hand or hands toward the center. And probably the explanation of this fact lies in the specific stimulus material. The actions often mentioned are those actions that can be illustrated with upward gestures. For example, in the phrase "Садовник поднимается по лестнице," the gardener goes up the stairs. Here the semantics of the predicate could be considered as some special stimulus which can be more easily expressed by an upward gesture. And as for cephalic channel, we found that full noun phrases are more often accompanied by a head gesture, and this fact holds true for all functional types of gestures. For example, this is true for descriptive as well as for pointing and pragmatic type of gesture. And so they previously discussed hypothesis of full reference, which is more often aligned with some gesture. This hypothesis is supported not only by manual data but by cephalic communication communication channel as well. And as for the amplitude, we found that for movements A, for movement type A, their amplitude allows us to predict the concomitant referential expression and to determine the type of the gesture itself. And for movement type B, no correlation with the referential expressions was detected, and so subsequently, we can state that referential pragmatics is an additional factor to differentiate the exact type of the movement. So the referential pragmatics is an additional property of movement type A, but not for movement type B. And other features can be explained by individual gestural portraits of the participants. Here you can see our references, and thank you very much for watching.